July 20th special meeting, Planning Commission meeting to order. Let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen. Present. Commissioner Marsters.
Present.
Commissioner Silberman.
Present.
Vice Chair Bergman. Present. And Chair Gutierrez.
Present. Public comment. Public comment is limited to the items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future Commission agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anyone here to speak on an item that's not on the agenda? And since there's two people here and nobody's running to the front, I guess not. So moving along, public hearing. I guess I'll read public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, etc. on the application, followed with the staff's recommendations. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of our community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion from the floor can be held. The Commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only the issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice, the public notice, or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Speakers should fill out a speaker's form found by the door and hand it to the recording secretary prior to addressing the Commission. The speaker should come up to the microphone to speak since the meeting is being recorded. This will assist staff in preparing minutes. So this is a continuation of agenda item 537 Laurel Street, consideration of a minor use permit of the installation of 9 new antennas on an existing building and the construction of a shelter to house associated equipment. Continued from the July 9th meeting. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Andrea Martisich, and I'll be presenting this item this evening. As you mentioned, the applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit for the installation of 9 new antennas with associated equipment on an existing building at 537 Laurel Street. The proposal also includes a shelter to house associated equipment on the ground. And as you mentioned, this item was continued from the July 6th Planning Commission hearing. At that hearing, the Planning Commission heard the request for a proposal for 3 sectors of antennas to be installed on an existing building at 537 Laurel Street. The applicant, Verizon Wireless, proposed to install one of these sectors on the roof at the rear, one on the rear facade, and one on the south elevation. And what you see now on your screen is the previous proposal. At the hearing, the Planning Commission expressed concern with the facade-mounted antennas located at the rear, and those are the ones that are clouded on the screen, and noted that the antennas were highly visible from El Camino. The Commission requested that particular sector of antennas be moved to the front of the building, facing Laurel Street. Based on this request, the applicant has revised the proposal to move the antennas and is now proposing all 3 sets of antennas to be roof-mounted. The Commission also asked about the potential for construction along El Camino Real, along that corridor, and what the impact of the antennas can be. And at the request of the Commission, the applicant provided a letter which indicated that if a 4-story building were to be constructed along the alley and fronting El Camino, then the RF levels would be exceeded and above those allowed by the FCC. And that would be for the antennas, again, Sector A at the rear of the building. So this slide shows the proposed new antennas, and I wanted to just point out that the sectors have been relabeled, so Sector A is not the same as Sector A before. Again, Verizon is proposing to install 3 sectors of 3 antennas for 9 total. All 9 of these are proposed to be roof-mounted. Sectors B and C will be set back 2 feet from the roof edge, and all antennas will be painted to match the existing building. As the antennas have been moved from the rear of the building to the Laurel elevation, the sector that was originally facade-mounted, Sector B, has been moved up to the roof in order to angle the antennas in the correct direction. Excuse me. The municipal code requires that the roof-mounted antennas be located at the rear half of a building that faces a public street and that they maintain a 1-for-1 ratio for equipment setback. However, the municipal code also has a waiver process for these requirements. As you can see here, Sector C is proposed on the front half of the building, and both Sectors B and C are not meeting the one-for-one setback requirement. The applicant is therefore asking for a waiver to allow the antennas in these locations. In order to approve a waiver and the entire proposal, the Commission must make the findings as outlined in the staff report. An RF study was submitted subsequent to the issuance of the staff report and was distributed to the Commission, and hard copies are also at the dais. The study recommends several mitigation measures, and I wanted to point out something with this. Originally, staff wanted to point out that Condition 7 of the conditional use permit references the old RF study date. So should you choose to approve this, the new RF study date, which is July 16th, should be changed for condition number 7. However, I did speak with the applicant prior to the meeting, and they will speak to this a bit more, but they would actually like to remove this condition. And the reason for that is because it's an AT&T owned facility. A lot of the mitigation measures are something that Verizon has no control over, and it's a secure site anyways, so they're not sure that it's necessary, but they'll speak a little bit more to that. Should you choose to approve the use permit and keep that condition, then condition 7 should be changed to reflect the new date. The revised locations of the antennas will ensure that they're less visible from El Camino and new development along that corridor. This portion of El Camino has had recent approvals such as Transit Village and also has several properties that are underutilized. It's likely that future development will occur along this corridor. The antennas will be better placed along the Laurel Street frontage as they will be facing a parking garage and have less of a visual impact. And this is the view from El Camino Real. So as you can see, there's the 2 roof-mounted antennas. The one at the rear is no longer proposed in that location. And then the Laurel Street frontage, I clouded the 2 antenna locations. Again, they're roof-mounted and would be painted to match the building. Findings are listed in the staff report and encompass safety, visibility, height and placement standards, general plan consistency, and suitability of the site. And as outlined in the staff report, the proposal and the waiver for the antennas meet the findings as required by the municipal code. It's prior to closing, I also wanted to note that before a neighbor had reached out about the landscaping, we have not heard from that neighbor since our response to them, so no new neighbor comments have come in. And we are recommending that the Planning Commission approve the Verizon Wireless's request for conditional use permit for the 9 new antennas, along with associated equipment on the building, and then in construction of the shelter at ground level to house the associated equipment. And this is the formal motion you should make if you would like to approve the item. I have revised it to include changing the date on that condition number 7. Again, if you would like to remove it, you wouldn't have to include that section. I'm available for questions. The applicant is here, and he also has an engineer with him. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you guys want to come up to the dais?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'd like to thank staff again for all the hard work that she put into the project. It was difficult, I'm sure, to develop everything in such a short period of time. And it's very nice that she worked hard to get it completed. I also have with me Neil. And Neil works with Hammett and Edison, and Neil is a professional engineer specializing in electrical engineering. So if anybody has a question for him, he does not work for Verizon. He works for a third-party company. So he's very familiar with the site, and his company wrote the letter and did the report. We changed the drawings. And we think that, we hope that the Planning Commission likes the new design. And if anybody has any questions for me or for our expert, radio frequency expert, we are available.
Great. There's a mention made to condition number 7 and you wanting it removed.
Well, when I presented the conditions to AT&T, they kind of said to me, can you please, have that one removed because it's our building. It's not like anybody has public access to it. So we control our roof and the access to it. And it's a very secure facility. You cannot get into the parking lot without a key. They are very security conscious, and they do need to comply with OSHA guidelines for antennas and rooftop installations, but they would like to do it, they would like to have control of that.
Does anybody have any questions for the applicant right now?
I do, just to help me interpret the frequency report. So the engineer, I'm going to keep it super duper simple. Can you point me to where in the report I can see that with the new placement, to the extent that a 4-story building is built on the rear of the building, that the frequency levels will be below the standard allowed?
So the new report does not explicitly state that.
I didn't think it did.
It doesn't,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
So the hypothetical 4-story building is not included in the revised report. That was addressed in the letter for the old design. With the new design, the report does state that the maximum calculated level at it states the level at the parking structure across the street as 13% of the public exposure limit, so well within the public exposure limit. That would be the maximum at any existing building. So the maximum calculated level at any existing building based on this new design, cumulative levels including AT&T's antennas and T-Mobile's antennas and the proposed Verizon antennas, are 13% of the public exposure limit. So for existing levels, it will comply. And with the new design of the site, with the antennas oriented differently, it doesn't expressly say so in the report, but I can tell you that levels at a 4-story building to the northeast of the building would comply with FCC limits.
Is there any particular reason why, and I'm not criticizing you, but and you may not have known this, but one of the concerns that gave rise to us continuing this were concerns that the property owner behind would not be able to build a 4-story building, and so I'm just wondering why the report didn't contain that statement.
We were asked to give you a special letter.
Okay.
And the letter basically states that if a 4-story building was built behind the property and the antennas were still on the back of the building, it would exceed the levels, and that's in your package.
Okay, I saw that.
Okay. So we didn't address it in the report because we were giving you the letter.
I'm so confused now. The letter says that, can I see the letter again? I know I've read it.
I calculate to exceed this.
I think I follow. The idea is that if you kept the antennas where they were, a 4-story building behind you then it would exceed the limit. But now, with the antennas moved, everything should be within public limits. Am I saying that
correct.
correctly?
Yes, and the letter does mention that in the case that the 4-story building was put there and built there, then one of the mitigation measures for Verizon, if they had those antennas still at that location on the back side of the building, would be to relocate that sector, which is what's happening.
Right, and the idea then is to circumvent that and just relocate them now.
Yes, so we're preemptively resolving that issue.
Right.
Okay, so, and this is, I understand what you were saying, sir, and the letter does say that the old design would have frequencies higher than acceptable levels, which frankly was our understanding. I don't know why, but that was our understanding that was likely the case at the last meeting. But what I was trying to determine was why the letter didn't specifically say that the redesign would not have that same effect. And I think it kind of does by implication, where it says, however, several mitigation options may be implemented to reduce exposure levels there, including the relocation of the antennas proposed to be oriented toward 45 degrees. So that's the current proposal, is the mitigation measure.
Correct.
And you're telling us today that mitigation measure will reduce RF frequencies to an acceptable level for a 4-story building to be built there.
Correct.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question here? So this isn't necessarily directly related to this project, but sort of more information for us. When these antennas are put up, the radio frequencies go in a particular direction, right? And are they 360 degrees, or are they sort of directed in one area? And then how far from that antenna is sort of, and this is sort of a hypothetical and everything, but how far out before those radio waves drop off enough that you're below the sort of the public limit for RF frequencies? Just a ballpark number.
Absolutely. So these are directional panel antennas, so they're not 360 omnidirectional antennas, and that's very typical of all these cell sites that are being built now. These particular antennas that are proposed, the 9 antennas, have about a 45-degree half-power beam width, so effectively the large majority of the power coming from the antennas is within 45 degrees left to right of the center of where the antenna is directed. And typically they have 10 to 15 degrees vertically. So it's very narrow top to bottom and fairly wide. These would be narrower than average. It's typically 65, 45, something like that, horizontally. So yes, the main power from the antenna is highly directional. The report states that no access within 22 feet directly in front of the antennas is recommended for occupational exposure. So that would be 22 feet is effectively the distance where workers would not be permitted. The public limit, that 22 feet is the extent of the occupational limit for the FCC. The public limit is 5 times more restrictive than that. Okay. So effectively
100 feet.
Roughly
Ballpark.
100 feet, ballpark. Okay. And there's a little bit more math to it than that, but that would be your estimate, yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, can I get a motion to...
Before, I'm going to make the motion, but I wanted to resolve the issue of condition 7. My inclination, rather than removing it entirely, because I do think that there are portions of it that might be applicable, for example, the training component, as well as to the extent that Verizon doesn't have direct control over the signage, they could certainly, take some action to the extent the signage isn't there. Also, they seem to presumably have to access the roof at some point, which means they need to go through those locks. So I would just, what I would be prepared to do is simply add to the extent feasible to the condition, and that would be the motion that I would like to make if it seems like there's general concurrence with that, rather than removing it.
I'm fine with that.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. So I move that the Planning Commission approve Verizon Wireless's request for a conditional use permit to install 9 new antennas and associated equipment on an existing building at 537 Laurel Street, as well as a new shelter to house ground-mounted equipment based on the required findings and for the reasons incorporated in the staff report, with a revision to condition number 7 to reference the July 16, 2015 RF report and to modify it to require that it be required only as feasible.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm not going to go through the formalities, I'm just going to adjourn. Lisa, look at, not bad, huh? She wanted 10 minutes before meeting so we can get the change.
I want to say that I'm going to be much more patient.